Okay, this is chapter 7, homework problem number 1. We have Rachel runs her own dog stand on the U of A campus. It says that the monthly cost of the cart rental and business permit, I'm going to circle this one, is $300. So guys, that would be known as a fixed cost right there. So the $300 is fixed. It goes on to say that Rachel spends 50 cents on each hot dog sold, including bun and condiments, and she sells each hot dog for $2. So there's the sales price. The 50 cents, that would represent your variable cost per unit. Okay, so the requirements are they want you to calculate the contribution margin per unit, the contribution margin ratio, and then do a prediction based on this cost behavior. So just look down at part number 1, the contribution margin per unit. Again, you take your sales price, subtract out your variable cost, and that's going to be your CM per unit. So if our sales price is $2 and our variable cost are 50 cents per unit, then that's how you're going to get the $1.50 per unit. That would be part 1. Part 2, your ratio, all you have to do is take the $1.50 and divide that by $2, and that's going to give you 75% or 0.75. So that would be your ratio. And then the last part, to make a prediction on income, what you would do is you take your contribution margin per unit, which in this case is $1.50. You're going to multiply that by, in this case, it's 1,000 units sold. So that would give you what, $1,500 of contribution margin dollars. And then of course you still have to pay your fixed cost, which are in this case $300. So you take $1,500, which is your total contribution margin, minus your fixed cost of $300. That would give you an operating income prediction of $1,200. Okay, this is chapter 7, homework problem number 2. It's using essentially the same data from problem number 1. So just to kind of refresh that, we had the monthly cart rental. It was $300, so that was your fixed cost. Label that as your fixed. You had a CM per unit of $1.50, which if you remember the sales price was $2, I believe. That was on the previous problem. And they gave you a CM ratio of 75% or 0.75. So the two parts to this problem are, number 1, calculate break even. And then part 2 says how much sales revenue does Rachel need to generate each month to break it. So both of them are break even. The first one, I'm going to make a note, this is for units break even. And the second part is they want the same idea, but they want you to express those units in dollars. And I'll show you a couple different ways you can do it. So on part 1, this one's simple. You simply take the formula, which is your fixed cost, and divide by your CM per unit. So in this case, our fixed costs are $300. You divide that by $1.50, and that's going to give you a break-even units of 200. So that's part 1. Part 2, they want the same thing in dollars. So you could take, again, the fixed cost. Here's the formula, fixed cost, divide by your CM ratio. So if you take 300 and divide that by 0.75, that's going to give you dollars of 400. You could also take the sales units and break even, which is 200, and multiply that by the sales price, which was $2 from the previous problem, and you'll note that that's also going to give you the same answer. This is chapter 7, homework problem number 3, using again the same data. So just to remind you, we've got your fixed cost of $300, that's fixed. The CM per unit is $1.50, and the CM ratio is 75%. So in this case, they want a targeted profit. In this case, they want it in units, again, and in dollars, if they want to make $900 per month. So it's essentially the same formula. You take your fixed cost and you add your targeted profit and then divide by your contribution margin per unit. So your fixed cost being 300, your targeted profit being 900, divide that by $1.50, and that's going to give you 800 units. Now, if you want to convert these units into the dollar amount, since we know that the sales price, just to remind you, the sales price was $2 per unit, you could just go ahead and multiply that by 2, and that would give you the 1,600, which is the correct answer. Or, again, you could then take the fixed cost plus the targeted profit and then divide by your CM ratio. It's going to give you the same thing. So again, the 300 plus the 900 divided by the 0.75 will also give you the same answer, which is $1,600. This is Chapter 7, homework problem number 4. This is going to be a weighted average contribution margin and a sales mix. So in this case, we got the same data, the monthly cost of the cart rental, there it is, the $300, so that's your fixed cost. We have for the hot dogs, the CM per unit is $1.50, and then now they're going to be selling some potato chips. The CM per unit there is 0.75. Here's our sales mix, 5 bags of chips for every 10 hot dogs. So if you want to look at it, it's almost like a 1-to-2 ratio. But in any case, if you go down here, the first part of this is they want you to calculate the weighted average contribution margin per unit. So they told you right away the hot dogs is $1.50 and the potato chips is 0.75. So you can multiply the hot dogs by 10 and the potato chips by 5. You get 15 and 3.75. You add those two together, you get a total of $18.75. And then of course, if we have 10 hot dogs and 5 bags of chips, that's a total combined units of 15. You just divide that by 15, and you're going to get a weighted average CM of $1.25. That's part 1. Part 2 then says you want to have a targeted profit again of 900. So again, what you do is you take your fixed cost plus your targeted profit, in this case divide by your weighted average contribution margin per unit, which is $1.25. So again, it's going to be the 300 plus the 900, divide that, you get 960. That's going to be your break-even units. Now, the last part of this is to say, okay, so how much of these units should be hot dogs and how much should be potato chips? So if you go back to the mix, you can see it right down here. Here's your 960. So think of it as kind of like a ratio or a fraction. So if you've got 10 hot dogs out of 15, that's going to be 10 divided by 15. That's your ratio. Multiply that by 960, you get 640. And then for the chips, you take 5, divide that by the 15, and multiply that by 960. That's going to give you the 320. So that's how you can figure out how much of the break-even units should come from the hot dogs and the potato chips. Okay, so this is Chapter 7, homework problem number 5. We've got the specialty foot buys hiking socks for $6 per pair. That's a variable cost per unit. Sells them for $10. That's the sales price. You got monthly fixed cost of $20,000. And then over here, they've already calculated the break-even point to be 5,000 units. And this is what they've been selling, which is 9,000 pairs. So for the requirement number 1, they want what they call the margin of safety. They want this in units, in dollars, and as a percentage. So the first part says begin by identifying the formula to compute the margin of safety in units. You basically just take your expected or actual sales and subtract out your break-even sales. That's how you do it. So in this case, if they're selling 9,000, you subtract out the 5,000, which is your break-even. That's going to give you 4,000 as your margin of safety. That's how they would get that. The next part says if you want this in dollars, of course, you could always just go ahead and multiply this 4,000 by the sales revenue, which is 10. That would give you $40,000. That's probably by the quickest way. Or the other way is it's the same formula, except it's the expected sales in dollars minus the break-even in dollars. And so you just have to go back and convert your sales dollars. If you have, for example, if you're selling 9,000 shoes and you multiply that by your sales price, that's 10. That's going to give you, what, $90,000. And then, of course, if you subtract out your break-even point, which in this case it's 5,000 units, times $10, which is the sales price, that's $50,000. Again, these are dollars. So 90 minus 50, that would also give you the 40. Notice it's the exact same answer. So there's where they get the 40,000. The last part to compute it as a percentage of sales, you can do it in dollars or sales. You could take the margin of safety in units and divide by your expected sales. So you'd take the 4,000, for example, and that was your units, and then simply divide that by the 9,000, and that's going to give you about 44%. The next slide, I'll show you requirement part 2. Okay, so on this slide, I'm going to go over requirements 2 and 3. In requirements number 2, it says at this sales level, it says what is their operating leverage factor. So to calculate operating leverage, you have to take your contribution margin and divide by operating income. That's how you get your factor. So in this case, I'm going to write this off to the side here. The sales price was $10. The variable cost was 6 per unit. That gives you a CM per unit of 4. If you multiply that by the 9,000 units which they're selling, that would give you a total contribution margin of 36,000. If your fixed cost were 20, you subtract that from 36, you get 16,000 as your income. So to get your factor, you simply take the 36,000, which is your contribution margin, divide by the operating income of 16, and that's going to give you 2.25. And then if you just take this factor and then multiply by the change in sales volume, in this case it's 11%, so you just take the 2.25 and multiply that by your 11%, that's going to give you your decline of 24.75% is how that would work. Part 3 says, what if they change the sales price to $9 per pair? So if your sales price was $9, your variable cost is still 6. That would give you a contribution margin of 3. Okay, so it takes that down to 3. And if your fixed costs are at 20, you just divide that by 3. That's your new CM per unit, and that's going to give you right around 6,667. That would be your new break-even point. Requirement number 4 will be on the next slide. Okay, so this is requirement part 4. This is a sales mix problem. And they go ahead and tell you that they're going to have some hiking socks and some dress socks. Then you got the sales price of 9 and the sales price of 7 that's given. That's right up here. You got, here's your new sales price of $9. And of course, each pair of socks is 7. They gave you the $3. We already know the hiking is 6. So the CM per unit for each of these is $3 and $4. We need to know the sales mix, which in this case is 4 to 1. They sell 4 socks for the dress socks for every 1 hiking sock. So again, to get the weighted average CM, you multiply by the weight. So 3 times 1 is 3, 4 times 4 is 16. You add those together, you get 19. Divide that by 5. Your weighted average CM is going to be 380. So then to get the break-even point, of course, the total fixed cost was 20. You divide that by 380, and that would give you 5,264, which would be the break-even point in units. And then of course you got to multiply this individually. So we've got your hiking, right, this right here, hiking, and your dress. So for the hiking it's going to be 1/5, and for the dress it's going to be 4 out of 5. Okay, so if you multiply by these weights, the 5,264 times 1 out of 5 ratio, 4 to 1 ratio for hiking, that's going to give you right around 1,053. And for the dress, it's going to give you 4,211.